Today you'll meet a young Malay Muslim woman who's done something remarkable, given her community a mirror to truly see themselves, not as some simplified version, but in a beautiful, complicated way. Layers, different shades, different nuances that emerge from her one inquisitive question: what is Malayness? And in doing so, she's left us all with a thought, a radical question. Can we sit comfortably in the grey? The grey between who we're told to be and who we really are, between the identity we inherit, are born into, and the one we choose, between the neat CMIO boxes and the complex realities of being human. Welcome to the Brown Box. Today's guest is Yulianna Frederika, founder of Lepak Conversations, an online advocacy platform bringing vital Malay Muslim issues into mainstream through research, dialogue, and empathy. But also Yulianna, the daughter, the granddaughter, the sister, the lover of art, of Batik, and of her grandmother's black, spicy rendang. We begin as we always do, at the beginning.
I am a lot closer to my mom than my dad, so I think the most that I know about my dad's side is that he's Bawayanis, so his family originated from Surabaya in Indonesia. So my mom's side, I think that's where I know a lot more of her side. Her family originated from Manado, Sulawesi, which is all the way east, far east in Indonesia, and it's a primarily Christian community. My grandfather was the only one among his siblings who moved to Singapore. The rest mostly remained in Indonesia, and I had a granduncle who moved all the way to Netherlands. So there is still that connection to Netherlands. I think my great-grandmother was Dutch as well. To me, coming from such a blended, exciting background, maybe that's why I've always had a natural curiosity, because I was born into it and I was curious about, what is it about my great-grandmother, my Dutch great-grandmother, and how did she marry an Indonesian man, and what has it that she was from a royal family? I don't know the truth to this because as an adult I didn't investigate this yet, but apparently she was from the royal family and she had her royal lineage denounced because she married a common man. I think what's most fascinating to me about my great-grandparents was that, firstly, my name is Yulianna Frederika, and the Frederika comes from my great-grandfather and my grandfather. So they're both named Frederick Senior and Junior. I guess that's also why I've always had an affinity to them, because I have their name. I never met my late grandfather, but just because we have the same name, I think I feel a lot of connection to him, and there's a lot of longing. If somebody asked me if there was one person who's passed on and you want to have dinner with, who would it be? I'd say it's my late grandfather. Also because my mom tells me a lot of stories about him. He worked with the Indonesian embassy in Singapore, so he would host a lot of travelers and sailors and visitors and guests in his home, and my mom would tell a lot of stories about, this would come and he would give us gifts and he speaks this language and I didn't understand. Again, this richness of diversity was exposed to me so early on. It was more recently that I found out more about my great-grandfather, because I realized my aunt had sent me newspaper clippings about my great-grandfather, who's an artist. I knew he's an artist because we have his artwork at home, and I have this understanding that his artworks are also in the Raffles Hotel. But I never questioned how it ended up there until I saw the newspaper clipping, and it said Frederick Kasinda is the first Batavian, I think they call it. It wasn't Indonesian back then. The first Batavian artist to exhibit in Singapore at the Raffles Hotel. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing. I think then there was that stronger connection of, I think maybe it runs in the family, that we're meant to create something big, something at scale, something that will last beyond generations. And that's something that I think about a lot. What's the kind of legacy I want to leave behind, especially because in Singapore my name is so unique, Yulianna Frederika. And I remember one time I was receiving an award bursary in Polytechnic, so I was maybe 19, 20, right? And this was at my community center near home. And I walked down the stage and this lady says, "Did you go to kindergarten at block 106? And I was like, yes. I was your principal. I remember you because of your name. And I was like, what? This is 14 years ago. I don't know. But she remembered me just because of my name. There are a lot of instances in life where people remember me just because my name is quite unique. So I've always felt this sense that because people remember my name, I want them to remember it well. And I always think about my great-grandfather and my grandfather in that sense, because I've never met them, but I keep hearing stories about them, and I want my stories about me to be told well as well.
A royal lineage, perhaps. A great-grandfather, an artist whose work hung in Raffles Hotel. A grandfather, a man who opened his doors to everyone. Travelers, sailors, strangers, people who later became stories that fell on Yulianna's ears. A name, Frederik, a name people remembered decades later. That's the legacy woven into Yulianna's past. But her actual childhood? It was simple.
I remember a lot of simple joys. For some reason, I remember being in kindergarten a lot. I grew up with diverse friends, Malay, Chinese, Indian, and I think from a very young age, that was like 4 or 5 years old, and I already appreciated that difference about my friends. Oh, he looks different from me. That's exciting. I think that largely colored my life. At home, I have 2 older brothers. I had my parents, and I think I remember, I guess, the TV and the karaoke console very fondly. I remember watching Power Rangers and all of those kind of shows with my brothers especially. I think we bonded a lot in front of the TV over shows. And I remember food being a big part of my childhood. I think especially in primary school, my mom had an affinity for trying out recipes. I don't know how you pronounce it. Nigella? Is that her name? Yeah, Nigella, Rachel Ray. She would try all his recipes. And I remember very fondly a chocolate mousse recipe, which I remember how it tastes to this day. My mom has not made it since I was in primary school, but I think food is something that connects me very strongly to my family. And music, yeah, the karaoke console. My dad loved Indonesian bands. My mom, I think, was more adventurous. She was listening to American music. And at some point, my aunt moved in with me when I was about 10 or 11. And I think that probably is the most memorable part of my early years. My aunt was very exciting because she is probably the most adventurous person in my family. And she calls herself that exciting auntie, the adventurous auntie. And she is Christian because my mom comes from an interfaith family, in that my late grandfather, his family is Christian. He was from Indonesia. He moved to Singapore. When he met my late grandmother, he converted to Islam so that they could get married. And they were open about religion, told their children, you have the freedom to choose. They sent their children to a Christian kindergarten. They also did the 5 prayers at home, 5 daily prayers at home. As Muslims, 2 of my aunts and uncles are Christian, and the rest of my mom's siblings, 4 of them are Muslim. For me, being Muslim and then having a Christian auntie sleep with me in the same bedroom, share the same bedroom with me, was very exciting. She would tell me about all of her travels all around the world. I remember she has friends in Africa, in America, in Netherlands, and I was just so excited. I did not know as an 11-year-old that the world was so big and there were so many possibilities. With my aunt, music, food, I think there were all those same connections as well. Music, she listened to American music, but also Korean music, and maybe that's where my love for Korean music stemmed for as well. My work involves a lot of work with interculturalism and interfaith conversations. A lot of it, I think, is shaped by my aunt. And I think my earliest memory of it is her preparing food, right? There was a very clear distinction that, okay, my food is not halal, so I'm going to use different pots and pans. My aunt would be clear about what ingredients are okay or not. When she shares her travel, she also shares about the food that she tries. I think there was once where she told me about the bitterballen in the Netherlands, and she's like, I'll make a halal version for you. Yeah, so I think food, music seems to be a common connector for me, and I have very strong memories about it from my childhood. Yeah.
But also in that, like, a smoother kind of navigation between being Christian and being Muslim in these different scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really quite beautiful. I like to think that I'm the exciting aunt.
Yes, we all need an exciting aunt.
We all need an exciting aunt for sure. Yes, I like to think I was that exciting aunt, the one who traveled, lived in different places, watched different movies, and opened up a world for my nieces that was bigger than Bangalore, the city they were born and live in today. But there were parts of me that weren't allowed in my sister's Christian home. My yoga practice was considered too Hindu. My visits to temples, my love for chanting, they were not talked about. But Yulianna's story, her relationship with her aunt, holds something deeper than mine ever did. It carries the tools for inclusion, for an everyday kind of harmony and acceptance that my family never quite gave me. And as she shares more, I recognize something familiar. Her relationship with her mother was, like my relationship with my sister, complicated.
My mother. I think most recently, I came across someone on LinkedIn who said she's putting a pause on her career to raise her very young children. And for some reason, it was only then that I realized, hey, my mom was a secretary to a bank CEO, and she paused her career to raise me. Right, so she was still working when she had my 2 older brothers, but she stopped when she had me as the third of the lot, and I guess she felt like she had to pause. Now that I'm 27 and I am well into my career, I realize what a big sacrifice that is, and especially because I think a big event in our lives was that my dad passed on in 2019. I think it has been particularly difficult for my mom to be the sole breadwinner in that sense. Being a single mom, I remember we went for an open mic poetry recital, and there was an interactive element with the audience. The host told us that the theme is grief. And I was like, wow, how apt. Me and my mom, I don't think we've ever talked about our grief. We wrote down our answers. I did not know which answer was my mom's, but it just so happened that my friend was there and she had taken a photo of the written cards, and I recognized my mom's handwriting. And it said, grief is not realizing all the unknown bills that you now have to pay. I think about that a lot. I think the weight that my mom always carries for her children, but also for her own family. I think she has a lot of grief in particular because she lost both her parents, she lost 2 siblings, she lost her husband. She has a lot of losses in her life, and I really wonder how she moved through life. It seems that she is just very vibrant and she laughs a lot just to get through it. I guess I share that similar thread as well. She has those losses and I share those losses, but I was a lot younger when I had those losses. So I lost, I think, all of my grandparents by the time I turned 9. I lost my maternal uncles by the time I was 14. I lost more paternal aunts in my early 20s, and of course I lost my dad when I was 20. I think I wonder if my mom realizes how hard that is for me. I guess this mother-daughter relationship it's always quite difficult because I'm the only daughter in the family as well, and there is this expectation for me to take care of my mom. I often feel like, okay, then who's going to take care of me? I don't know, it's just this existential questions that I have as a result of things that have happened to our family. But yeah, I think my mom, without all of this grief, without all of this pain, she's actually a very generous person. I see that as a legacy she brought from her parents. My late grandfather hosting people, my late grandmother being the one to prepare dishes. Back in those days, the moms, they can't cook for just 5 people. They have to cook for 10, 20 people.
And 10, 20 dishes as well.
Yes, exactly. I see that in my mom as well. Her generosity, her kindness, and her love for life. And she's very exciting. I think I'm sorry, Mom, if I'm like revealing your vivacious personality. The kind of usernames that she has or whatever, it's like Red Snapper or Big Mama, something like that. It's like very wow, baba boom, right? So she has that vitality of life in her, but a lot of external events, I think, made her shy away or disappear into herself and not make her want to be so open. I see that about my mom. I see that about myself too. I think a lot of her experiences mirrors mine. And I think in recent years, especially, it's been a bit of a hard journey for both of us, for me to really find my own way. I think I'm a very stubborn daughter. I know what I want to do and I will do it. And I know how to convince her to let me do it. I think how far I've gotten today is really because she let me be stubborn. I don't see it often, but I know she worries about me a lot. Sometimes my teacher would say, hey, your mom spoke to me and she said she's a bit worried about your future and your career. And I was like, oh, I did not know this. To me, it just feels she lets me do what I want to do, and it feels like she let her grip off of me. And sometimes I wish she looked over me more. But yeah, there are times when it's revealed to me like, hey, actually your mom really cares about you a lot and she asks about you. Yeah.
I think that is the thing with Asian parental love. It's very coded. You have to really search for it.
Yeah. And the same thing with food, right? So if she knows she said something that upset me, she won't say sorry. She will go out, she'll buy some food and she'll say, nah, eat. So that's her form, her language of apology, right? I'm gonna feed you something so that you are nourished. And that's why I think food is always something that connects very deeply with me. It's a very emotive thing.
What would she cook for you if it was your birthday, or if you were down, or what's comfort food?
Birthdays are special because she would make pulut kuning, which is this yellow glutinous rice. Yeah, and then she would make it usually with rendang and then with boiled eggs. And sometimes she would dye it yellow or red just to make it look a lot more pleasant, because it is a celebration. And I think food is when I realized I was different from my friends, because for my birthdays I had that. But then when I met my Malay friends in primary school, I think that was already the earliest sign of, hey, you don't eat this at home, you don't eat this for your birthday. I think that was when I realized, oh, it's different, but that's not necessarily wrong or anything, it's just different. So yeah, pulut kuning for my birthdays. And Hari Raya, I think, is where the difference is apparent again, because my late grandmother has a mix of Javanese and Minang heritage. So her rendang is very different from the Malay rendang that you get here. The Malay rendang that you get here is often very saucy and it's brown, whereas my late grandmother's one, it's really dried down and it's almost black and it's a lot spicier. I'm happy to start a rendang war and say that my grandmother's rendang is the best. But yeah, so things like we would have ayam kalio, we would have daging ketumbar jintan, which is beef with some spices, which I've never seen in Singapore outside of my home. So I think I've always found it fascinating. But at some age, I think I maybe drew the line of, oh, it's different and therefore I don't fit in. I'm a bit alien, right? I think growing up, somewhere along the lines, it turned from, oh, different is good to, oh, different is alien and I don't fit in. But I feel like home is where I'm completely okay with all of these differences, because it's just what I was born into. But yeah, as I go out into society, I think it's very different. People start comparing, or I start comparing as well. I think the thing with my mom as well, because she felt, again, just linking how we mirror our experiences, she felt like she didn't belong to the Malay community here. And she has a very Christian name. Her name is Yvonne. Malays would always question her, like, are you sure you're Malay? Your name is Yvonne. And even till today, as an adult, she's wearing the hijab and people are still asking her, are you sure you're Muslim? Your name is Yvonne. Those kind of stories stuck to me about how she felt alienated. I think that made me view the world from that lens as well. Although I didn't fully accept it, again, I had that curiosity about why is there this distinction between what's different and what's good or bad, what's included or not. It became a lot more apparent when I left school and I entered the workforce. The biggest stereotype was like, oh, Malays are not hardworking. And it almost became my mission to, at my first internship, find out if Malays were hardworking or not.
How did these cliches that people have about Malay, were they revealed to you?
To be very honest, a lot of it was from my mum, because she had internalized a lot of it. I don't blame her for it, because that was just her experience, and that was just her worldview. But my Malayness was used against me, as in, oh, you are a Malay child, as if it's an insult. That's where I got a lot of my confusion. So I think being Malay is not really great, but I want to side with my mom and be Indonesian, but at the same time, she's not speaking Bahasa Indonesia, and she's not really practicing a lot of the cultural practices. So I felt very lost. I didn't know who I was supposed to be if being Malay is bad. I just had that curiosity. I wonder why you're saying this to me, and I'm your child. I think you should believe in me, regardless of what stereotypes are out there.
Her mother's perceptions, the way she saw herself in the world, didn't come from nowhere. This way of seeing the world came from the prejudice Malay Muslim women have long lived with in this country. I often think with kindness about this generation, women like her mother, and even women of my own generation, who never had the language to talk about racism. They just had feelings, being left behind, feeling less, feeling like there was no way to push back. This bias against Malays was something Yulianna would come to learn for herself.
My earliest memory of this was my mom coming back and saying that, oh, this department store told me to remove my hijab, and so I turned it down. And she was quite dejected, and I was very young then, so I thought, okay, then just find another job, because maybe I was too young to understand what she meant. But then I entered the workforce, and most of my female hijabi friends had the same anxieties, even before they applied for the job. Or what if I'm the only Muslim? What if I'm the only Malay? What if I don't have halal food? What if I don't have friends? And I wondered why I didn't have those concerns. I never had those concerns. Every time I applied for a job, I just applied for it, I got it. Even if I was the only Malay or Muslim person in the company, I was completely okay. So I guess that was when I saw very clearly I had some kind of privilege that other Malays maybe don't have. That was maybe when I started being curious about what I should do with that privilege. I don't feel comfortable, obviously, with this privilege, and I thought I had to do something about it. I think privilege, people often think about it as a dirty word, but everyone has some sort of privilege. A lot of us are able-bodied. That's a privilege that a lot of us take for granted. So yeah, for me, it's just, how can I use my privilege?
Define that privilege for me.
So my story was that my name is almost an advantage, right? Yulianna Frederika. At my first job, my boss had said, oh, you managed to close that client that I couldn't, because maybe the client thought you were Eurasian or something, and I think this client doesn't like working with Malay companies. I was shocked, and I was like, it was my first job. I can't believe that I did something that my boss can't just because her name sounds Malay. That didn't sit well with me. So my boss and other Malay people I've met throughout my career, they sometimes change their name or anglicize their name. For example, Khairul would become Kai, so that it isn't automatically obvious that they're a Malay person. And I think about, what if I was named Siti Fatima? I think my life would be very different just based on how I was named. It's just that people just form this perception that if you are Siti Fatima, you are Nur Hadijah or whatever, that you just might be a bit more conservative or whatnot. I think there are a lot of stereotypes about that.
Her mother faced prejudice for wearing the hijab. Years later, Yulianna found it was different for her. Although she wore the hijab, she was treated better, able to get ahead, maybe because of her name, her education, or simply because people didn't see her as fully Malay. It's in that gray area between her mother's experience and her own that Yulianna's story sits. I step back for a moment and ask her about her decision to wear the hijab.
I guess my hijab journey, there's almost nothing too profound about it. I think a lot of people think that there was some event in life that pushed you to wear the hijab. But for me, it was really because I was going to graduate from secondary school, and that meant that I won't have to wear school uniform anymore. And I was just thinking, oh, wearing the hijab is compulsory for women who are of age, and I don't have an excuse to not wear it. So I was okay, let me just wear it. So it was just that natural inclination. Maybe it's the fear, okay, I don't want to sin. At the time, my maybe understood Islam as a bit of a punitive religion. If you don't pray, you're going to hell. I think that's the kind of upbringing I had with regards to Islam. But it was really just my own isolated thinking. Okay, let's just try to wear it. I was not religious. My family was not religious. No one had spoke to me about the hijab. And it wasn't as if my friends around me were wearing the hijab. It was just me having that conversation with myself. Okay, let's just wear it. And it was just a decision that I made when I was 16. I had to tell my friends in advance because I don't know how they would react. And my best friend was like, yeah, sure, it won't change anything about you. I appreciated that statement. But the day that I first wore the hijab, I did not tell the friends that I was with. So I think we went out of school, we were going for lunch. I said, okay, I'll go to the toilet. And then when I came out, they did not recognize me. They thought I was just some random person because I looked very different. It was the first time I wore the hijab and I was wearing a long lavender dress. I don't usually wear dresses or skirts, but I had just, at that young age, I had associated modesty and wearing the hijab with wearing skirts and dresses. So my friends could not recognize me, and when they saw me, they were stunned, but they didn't say anything because they don't know what to say. And I think that's all right. I don't expect them to react in any way. However they wanted to react was fine. But it was more that journey of the way I dressed, changing the way I dressed specifically to be more feminine. I bought a lot more skirts, a lot more dresses, and it worked for a while, but it just didn't feel like me. Because I grew up as a tomboy. I was completely comfortable wearing shorts and like t-shirts. That was all I wore. So wearing skirts and dresses was pretty weird and out of character for me. Maybe going to poly and meeting more Muslim women and other girls who are wearing the hijab and seeing that, hey, that girl's hijabi, but she's still very loud and rowdy in a sense. And because for some reason, I had this perception women who wear the hijab need to be shy and timid and modest. But when I saw her, I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's okay to be a bit rowdy as a hijabi. It's okay to have interest in K-pop, in Korean culture, all these kind of things. In seeing others, I gave myself that permission to also be true to myself, right? So I can be a Muslim woman and have interest in Korean music. I can be a Muslim woman and to dance, for example. I think a lot of things that I thought conflicted with being a Muslim woman, but yeah, the truth is that it doesn't. And this could be a liberal take here in Singapore, but I guess in more recent times in my adult years, traveling to Indonesia and seeing how, yeah, they're perfectly okay going to music performances and then having prayers right after. It's not un-Islamic or whatever. But I think one of my most memorable incidents was when I did my pilgrimage last year, 2024. I remember seeing this African woman wearing neon orange on the Holy Lands, and I was like, wow, look at this woman, because clearly I love to wear bright colors. I'm wearing like a very bright green, and I was like, yeah, Islam doesn't ask you to shrink yourself or fit yourself to one box, if you may. In fact, Islam is a very free and open religion, and it asks for you to practice your culture in accordance to your land. And that's why there were a lot of African women there who were wearing printed garments, very colorful garments, and even the Indonesian ladies there at the pilgrimage were wearing batik. The whole group of them wearing matching batik, and I was like, wow, I really identify with that. And I really wonder about the Islam that is practiced here. I think I've never felt by that standard I was a good Muslim. And I think in the same way that in Singapore you always feel like there's some standard and you have to live up to it, and if you don't, then you don't belong. So I felt that as a Muslim, as a woman, as a Malay, I always felt like I didn't fit in the box. In recent years, I've learned to be okay. I was cast into the public eye, and then I had certain expectations of how I needed to show up. This year was quite pivotal for me, especially when I won the Tatler Front and Female Rising Champion Award, and that really made me rethink my story, because I never thought it was possible for me to win such an award. It made me rethink what was possible for me. And then I slowly realized, hey, I think I've been masking all of this time. I've just been performing all of this time because I wanted to fit into whatever mold that people wanted me, Muslim, Malay, female, to be. And it really was in very recent times in the past few months that I intentionally tried to be a lot more authentic. So yeah, it has been a long journey of, I think, finding and expressing truly my identity as a Muslim, as a female, as a Malay.
That award, the Tatler Front and Female Rising Champion, was for Yulianna's work at Lepak Conversations, of course. I wanted to know more.
I think just everything that I've said so far about questioning my Malayness led to that point in time. I think I was maybe 19 and I realized I really want to reject my Malayness entirely. And when I turned 21, I want to legally remove the Binti Abdul Rahman in my name, which is my father's name, but also the most Malay sounding part of my name. I wanted to use my mom's family name, Kasinda, because it doesn't sound like a Muslim at all. That was just to explain just how much resentment I had. And I feel quite sad for myself. Thankfully, today I have Lepak Conversations, and I say that it's that community that I didn't have, but I created for myself, and I'm very thankful for it. But what sparked Lepak Conversations was when my former co-founder, who at the time was my best friend, she had an assignment for her university, and she was pushing back against her professor who had published something that said Malays are economically backward. Just reading that, I just felt so furious. Even if I didn't know why I was furious, it just didn't sound right. I was shocked that at the highest level of education, this kind of harmful and negative rhetoric is being published. At least my friend was critical enough to notice it and push back against it. But anyone else reading it might just gloss over it. That was really when the fire lit in me to give access to this kind of information, this kind of knowledge, research, and actively debunk them. Because who knows what else is being said in these spaces, right? So that was when the fire sparked in me. Then it was GE 2020 and I was the first time voter, and I realized, wow, I don't know how to go about this, but let me learn more about how policies and politics affects the community. That was when we saw the petition asking Muslim healthcare workers to wear the hijab, and it already had 13,000 signatures. And we thought, wow, we knew this was an issue in the community, but we did not know that after so long, it had almost been 20 years, people still cared about it that much. I was personally inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement on social media, and because I had already been working in social media, I was like, okay, let me just use my professional skills, create an Instagram page, and together with my friend who then became my co-founder, we just did our research, put it up on Instagram, and it went viral beyond our imagination. I really think it was just because there was no such platform and we were just feeding that gap. What was distinctly different about what we did was that we made it not a Malay Muslim issue, right? This is an issue that should not just be discussed within the community, it should not just be discussed behind closed doors, which was the biggest frustration of the community, right? When it reached beyond the Malay Muslims and they saw, wow, I did not know that this was happening to fellow Muslim women in Singapore. It became a national issue. People were saying, I cannot accept that this is happening to my fellow Singaporeans just because they're Muslim and they choose to wear the hijab. I think that has continued to color how I approach my advocacy and my activism. This whole CMIO conversation that we've been having and putting people into boxes, I think is exactly why spaces like Lepak Conversations is needed, where the box doesn't exist. Or even if the box exists, we acknowledge it and we intentionally go beyond it. We intentionally draw outside of it. I don't think we can run away from the CMIO boxes. There are administrative purposes to CMIO, but humans are complex. They're not just one thing. I just think there's a lot more space for those kinds of nuanced conversations and acknowledgements of our complexity.
I went back to their very first post to understand what they were doing and what they wanted to achieve. First, why the name Lepak Conversations? Here's what they say. Lepak, the word often refers to spending one's time aimlessly loitering or loafing around. But it can also mean spending time sharing conversations with others. Their aim was to reclaim this word and reassign the negative perception around lepaking. And I would note here that this negative perception isn't just some casual judgment, but it's built on decades of stereotypes. It probably began with the narrative of natives being lazy, a story repeated by colonizers and later even echoed by political leaders. Prime Minister Mahathir, for instance, declaring doing nothing or sipping coffee or talking is almost a Malay national habit. And even said, if anyone asked me today, I would have to say that Malays are lazy. And here in Singapore, closer to home, Lee Kuan Yew once said that Malays were not as hardworking and capable as the other races. So yes, there is real power in Yulianna and her team's desire to reclaim this word. On their website, they describe themselves as a research and advocacy platform that aims to nurture a society where Malay and Muslim communities are understood, accepted, and respected, while fostering racial harmony in Singapore. But I wanted to hear it from Yulianna herself, how it all began, what were the early days of Lepak Conversations, what was it all really about?
I think it stemmed from both me and my co-founders' personal experiences because we did not fit nicely, neatly into the Malay box. We thought, okay, let's have a conversation about what Malayness is, because based on our personal experiences and also that of our friends, it's not such a clear definition of who gets to be a Malay. We wanted to create a space to discuss that because we want to reject that Malay is only one type of person. It was our first in-person event because this was in 2022. It was right after COVID and restrictions had just lifted. I was very surprised by the very good reception that we got. We had 25 people and we sold out in a day, less than a day, I think. This mattered a lot to us because we started on Instagram. We were just an online community and we were like, okay, let's try to go offline because it seemed like after COVID, people wanted that sense of connection. There were a few things that I remember that stuck out to me. It was the diversity of the audience. I remember very clearly one interaction. This guy who to me looks Chinese because he's fair-skinned, and I was just asking, oh, what brought you here? His immediate reaction was, am I not allowed here? I was like, no, not at all. I was just curious what brought you here. I think he already had that assumption again, oh, I don't fit in this Malay box. But he explained, oh, I'm half Chinese, I'm half Malay. I know I don't look like I'm Malay, but I am half Malay. So yeah, it was revealing to see those conversations happen in real time to people who don't fit the box. That's the beauty of that space that we created. The other memorable moment was with the panelists who were all women. It was unintentional, but they were all women. And they had told me, this is the first time we've had a space where the panelists were all women, all Malay Muslim. And I feel so seen, so included. And I was shocked because one of them is a doctor. She holds a PhD. She's a very well-respected researcher. Another person is the head of an interfaith organization. Another person is a C-suite leader. And I was like, you've never had the opportunity to come together on all-female, all-Malay Muslim panel. That's quite crazy. The panelists, the reason why we got a researcher, someone from an interfaith perspective, someone from a C-suite perspective, was because we wanted to diversify the conversation. Malayness is not just about what the IC says. It shows up in leadership positions, women who can't even break the glass ceiling and get there. And in the interfaith scene, how do others perceive us and how should we perceive ourselves in that sense? Especially after 9/11, I think what stood out to me was that the Harmony Center was set up right after 9/11 to bridge Muslims with other faith organizations. But since 9/11, it has always seemed like the Muslims were the one who had to be the bigger one and reach out first and extend and denounce all violence and terror and say that we're peaceful people. So there was that conversation as well. And then from a research lens, it was really, let's look at historical context. Did this start with colonizers calling the Malays lazy, and how has that continued to be perpetuated today? So it was a very lively, robust, diverse conversation. It was just very energizing to just see the diversity in that room. That was what that conversation opened up, right? Questioning what is Malayness. Maybe a year later, I had a team member join me. She was closer to 40 at that point of time, and I was talking to her about this idea of Malayness again, and should we talk about it again? And she told me this issue isn't new. We've been questioning what is Malayness for so long, even in my time, 20 years ago. And I was like, oh wow, and why have we still not come to some sort of, I don't know, answer or landing point? Why are we still questioning ourselves and our identity? So it's still an ongoing conversation. Most recently, we just published a zine. It's called The Inquisitive Future of Malayness. And why I decided to frame it towards the future was because I felt like the community often is held back by its past, right? Maybe it's nostalgic and it felt like the heydays are gone and they want it to come back, but they don't know how. But also in the present, it always feels like the community is painted as a community that is lagging behind other communities, whether it be in the numbers of university graduates, whether it be in income and so on. And there's no space for us to imagine the future, but also have the agency to decide what we want for ourselves, because it's always been someone else telling us that we're lagging behind, someone else telling us that we're lazy, but we've never had our own voice. Shifting that conversation to imagine the future of Malayness hopefully gives Malay people that power and agency to think and imagine for themselves what they want. In my work with Lepak Conversations, in the very first issue we advocated for was the tudung issue. I had some semblance of my mom's experience, my friend's experience, but I was just shocked at all of the anonymous stories pouring in.
Wearing the hijab was such a personal act for Yulianna, so it feels right that it became one of the first issues she chose to advocate for. And when you look at the timeline of this debate, you realize how recent and ongoing the struggle has been in Singapore. The hijab is not allowed in public schools, and there have been a couple of times where Muslim girls have even been suspended for wearing it. And it wasn't until 2021, after years of petitions and a pandemic that pushed frontline workers into the spotlight, that Muslim nurses were finally allowed to wear the hijab at work. In other public sector uniformed roles, the hijab is still not permitted. Lepak's approach to this campaign was holistic, part education, part advocacy. They broke down the history, explained what MPs were saying, outlined what workplaces could do, what individuals could do, and highlighted the steps policymakers could take in Parliament. It was really impressive, thoughtful, measured, and grounded in community. Not just Malays, but Malay allies as well. Here Yulianna shares this story.
A girl as young as 16, she was waiting to enter poly. She was turned away from a logistics job where she just had to do some packing because she wore the hijab. There was, I think, a nurse who had close to 20 years of experience, and she has not been able to wear the hijab. The one story that really affected me was this lady who, she works all the way up to having a PhD, and one of the research companies or laboratory turned her away. And I said, wow, you could have high qualification, but you could still be turned away. Unfortunately, she moved overseas to get other opportunities. I think about all of those people we lose just because we don't give them a chance.
After the hijab campaign, Lepak Conversations took on other issues. Domestic violence, unpacking how silence and shame often keeps victims from getting help. They looked at feminism, asking what the word really means and why it's still misunderstood. They tackled the issue of migrant worker transportation, and they started a conversation about halal food, what it is, who it's for, and how to bridge what they called the halal gap. But the campaign that was closest to Yulianna's heart, the one she pushed hardest for, was about mental health in the Malay Muslim community.
That campaign was deeply personal. It was something that I put on the table and I said, I want to talk about it because of my personal experience. There were key incidents in my own family. The earliest one was when my dad had to be sent to IMH, the Institute of Mental Health, because his work performance had been falling and he had been skipping work, and it was his own company that sent him there. He's always been quite distant, and that's why it was especially difficult in that time, because I did not want to open up about what was going on. I remember a time when in this period he physically fell in the kitchen, and all of us rushed to help him. He was very adamant and saying, "No, I don't need help, don't help me." And that really broke my heart as his daughter, because as a family I think we want to help him. At the same time, it was hard for me to see a man who I've always thought was strong falter. Quite soon after, he had a really high fever. He fell in the toilet and he was sent to the hospital. I was the last to know, because all of this happened very early in the morning, maybe 2 a.m. And everyone in the family had helped my dad. And I woke up and my mom said, "Oh, your dad is in the hospital." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Don't know how that happened. I felt a bit bad about not knowing about it, being the only person not to know about it, but it's okay. And then my dad's condition worsened and he was put in the ICU. I had to sit down with the doctor with my mom, and it was exactly as you would see in the movies. They're like, "I'm so sorry, he can't make it." We had that conversation with the doctor, and I had the task of telling all of my relatives and everyone that, "Oh, please come down and say your final goodbyes, because we're gonna pull out the life machine support," and so on. It was a very difficult time. But in the waiting room, I would see my two brothers just playing games on their handphone. And I was like, wow, are they okay? And I, of course, at the time, I didn't know this language for coping mechanisms and all that. But I was quite concerned about how they were doing, and they never expressed it. So that, I think, really left a deep imprint on me. Till this day, my family, but especially my brothers, have not talked about that grief of losing my father. I think about my eldest brother especially, because the one time I saw him break down was when he was saying his final goodbyes, and everyone was outside because he asked to be left alone, but I was the only one standing outside watching him speak to my father. That was the first time I saw him cry, maybe, and really break down. But after that, I didn't see that level of emotion again. That left a very deep imprint on me, and which is why I felt like it's not just that experience with my family, right? I think just generally across the board, I would hear a lot of my friends say that their fathers are very distant, very emotionally aloof, and nobody really expresses their emotions and blah, blah, blah. So I thought, okay, let's have the space to talk about it. And there were a lot of considerations, because at the time it was very taboo and sensitive to talk about it. The very first thing I think I tried to do was to use the right language, right? Talk about mental health. Nobody would come. Men's mental health. Malay men's mental health, even more. We spent quite a bit of time thinking about how to name it. We named it "Are You Okay, Bro?" It seems a lot more approachable. We could jump off that conversation of, okay, even if you do ask that question, "Are you okay, bro?" How do you answer? And you just say, "I'm okay," when you're actually not okay. Or when someone says they're not okay, how do you react then? You just say, it's no big deal, just suck it out, whatever. That became a starting point for how we would talk about Malay men's mental health. And the other key consideration was whether to talk about religion or not. Because I think a lot of the taboo and stigma comes from mental illness being seen as a spiritual illness, right? You're not praying enough, or you're not religious enough, therefore you're afflicted with this, or there's some sort of evil spirit that's disturbing you. We were very surprised by the turnout. We had 50 people, and we were very intentional in saying that this is for men, but if you are an ally of men, you are a sister, a mother to a son, you are welcome to come. And I think what was encouraging was seeing the woman who came and who knew, I'm here because I'm a mother to a young son and I want to raise him. I'm here because I have 2 brothers and I want to know how to talk to them about their emotions. But the conversation always comes back to men need to lead this. Women are willing, they're happy to, and they are doing it. But it's most powerful when men help each other. And that's, I think, the gap that really needs to be filled.
As that campaign, Are You Okay, Bro, was coming to an end, something happened on October 7th that would consume the Muslim world, my world, and Yulianna's world for the next 2 years.
My immediate reaction every time I hear just the word Palestine is just tears just start welling up in my eyes. And I think when 7 October happened, I could not have ever imagined that it would continue on 2 years later. I share that sense of helplessness that every Singaporean has, in that we feel like we can't do anything, and a lot of it is because of the legal boundaries, legal limitations around that. I had the opportunity to have a closed-door dialogue, and a lot of the sentiments there was that we want a physical space to just talk about it, because this was on the back of the announcement that the police will not allow any rallies at Hong Lim Park.
Let me give you some background about this closed-door discussion before Yulianna shares more. In March 2024, Lepak Conversations organized something extraordinary, the Gaza Monologues. It was the first time a public pro-Palestinian event in Singapore was openly supported by the government through its feedback arm, REACH. Nearly 300 people gathered at Scape's Ground Theatre to listen to dramatized readings of personal testimonies and narratives written by Gazans themselves, the Gaza Monologues. These readings aim to share the everyday realities, the hopes, the trauma, the struggles of Palestinians under siege. This was followed by a panel discussion. For Yulianna, it was a breakthrough, a way to do something and feel less hopeless, but not everyone saw it that way.
It was a very difficult decision for me to make, because we were given that space to talk about Palestine, but it was a space given by the government. And it was a moral question of, this is a government that's being very exclusive about who it allows to have a voice, have a space. And I was also grappling at the time with the fact that this is a government that is also complicit in the genocide. And even within the team, I think there was a lot of discussions about how we should approach it. We had collaborators that we wanted to work with, and when they heard that the government is coming on board, they pulled out. Completely respect that. But it was a very huge moral question for us about whether we should do it. We decided to go ahead with it because it was a solution to the question, the ask and the request that the community had, which is a physical space. This is a physical space that's given to us, so let's take this opportunity and let's navigate this as well as we can. So I guess fast forward to the day of the event, I think there was a lot of backlash from the community about our partnership with the government, and I expected it. And it was, on our end, it was just a matter of managing expectations and explaining our stance. There were over 300 people, and I don't take for granted how we're able to gather together with like-minded people, which till today remains a very rare opportunity. We had gotten local actors to perform the Gaza Monologues, which are scripts written by Palestinians themselves. It was very liberating to see the emotions that were shared in the room. And I think that was what a lot of people needed, just to express their emotions. Then we had a panel discussion, which, because it's Chatham House rules, I can't share the contents of it, but I think it was a bit of a frustrating conversation again, because people went in with some sort of expectation about getting answers from the government about their approach to this. But all of that aside, I think it was monumental in seeing how Singaporeans can organize themselves for Palestine, creatively using spaces, whether it be physical, whether it be online, to say something and do something. And I personally just feel very honored to be part of the team, but also grateful that I can turn my helplessness into something productive. And I think that's what's most important for many people, right? Turning that helplessness into action.
And Yulianna didn't stop there. In the months that followed, she and her friends worked to secure 3 scholarships for Gazan students to study in Singapore. A small practical way to turn helplessness into action. This sense of helplessness that she talks about, I felt it too. And I find myself returning to the thought of protests and our inability to protest here in Singapore. If you've listened to my last episode, you'll know we spoke a lot about protests from Hong Kong to Bangladesh, Nepal, and around the world, and what they mean to people who can take to the streets to express themselves, to find community, to find belonging, to feel less hopeless. I want to ask Yulianna what protest means to her when it's a right she doesn't have.
I think for me, the idea of protest, I guess, hit a lot closer to home with the recent protests that broke out all across Indonesia. As a Singaporean who has believed all her life that protests are not allowed and I'll probably never participate in one, to see that happen and to see the relevance of it to real people and their real emotions, I think made me think about us in Singapore. I started to maybe grieve a bit that lack of opportunity for us to truly express how we feel. How I see the government's approach to protest is, I think they're trying to protect security and stability. They always say our social fabric is very fragile and we don't want to break that. The conversations or the dialogues that I'm in with ministers, they still quote the riots of the 1960s. And as a young person, I say, but it hasn't happened for 60 years now. Why are we still so afraid of it happening again? And I wonder if the government can trust Singaporeans to manage our emotions. It boils down to trust as well. I trust that my citizens will not wreak havoc or whatever. But I think what the government did in that partnership with Lepak Conversations for Gaza Monologues was to try to creatively channel that energy that we have at protests, right? People speaking up, speaking out. They tried to creatively do that in our space. And the truth is, it did get pretty hostile at the event. People were raising their voice. There were very clear markers of no protesting, no placards, no rallying whatsoever, and that did not happen. But the same notion of people having very charged emotions, some people raising their voices, that did happen. I think the government's reaction was, they weren't a fan of it. My role as a partner was to share that it's not unexpected for a topic as emotionally charged as Palestine to have that happen. How else do you want people to react to an issue as emotionally charged as that? The rest of Singapore is not the parliament. I've been watching parliament and how they maintain their composure is really
British.
British. It's really amazing how they can maintain their composure that much. But society does not work like that. Society is not parliament. We're humans with very real, strong emotions, and we can't always remain composed, because I think the reasoning that I get back is, we cannot have a conversation unless you are calm and logical and rational. But, and I quote Prof. Walid, who's a very strong advocate for Palestine on this, how can we remain rational when such grave injustice is happening? I think we have a right to our emotions, and I do wish there were more spaces for us to express strong emotions in Singapore, and not just anger, but joy, celebration, pride. And I wonder where all of those strong emotions have gone. It's a society that doesn't allow for all of these strong and very human emotions to come true.
Yulianna, like me, is a big feelings person. 12 times through this conversation, one of us has had tears in our eyes, sometimes from grief, sometimes from pain and longing, sometimes from simply recognizing ourselves in each other's stories. Before we end, I wanted to ask her about Singapore and belonging. Does she feel like she belongs, or does she not? Yulianna's answer takes a surprising turn to another country, another culture, and another art form.
Someone describes Singapore as a hotel. It's a very nice place to live in, but you don't want to stay in it forever. And I think that's very heartbreaking, because I grew up believing in Singapore, and a Singapore dream. I think Singapore is great. I still think it's great. But I feel this emotion the most when I go overseas and I come back. And I cry because I feel like this is a country where I don't belong. Or I feel that this is a country that doesn't love me back. I think what has helped me, of course, is doing things for Singapore society in my own ways, but also reconnecting to my roots back in Indonesia and realizing I'm not an empty vessel, right? I came from somewhere, and that roots will always stay with me. It runs in my blood. It will always be with me, even if I'm removed from that land in Indonesia. And even then, I can still lay my roots here in Singapore, just as my parents have, just as my grandparents have. And I think we need that conversation of where we came from and that awareness of history. I always thought a lot about my great-grandfather, and I knew that art runs in my genes, right? Because my great-grandfather was an artist. And I guess all throughout the years, maybe I've just had a very Western understanding of what art is, because that was how I was educated. And it was only maybe as recent as 2022 that I met people my age who were interested in batik. That was when I discovered that batik was not just a print. Batik has different motifs with different meanings. It tells so much stories about where the batik comes from, the person who wears it, their relationship status. So each region would typically have its own motif. The most recognizable motif people would know is the one that looks like clouds. That is from Cirebon. The significance of that motif is that it seeks blessings, because clouds signify that rain will come and blessings will come. It also links back to how there's a significant Chinese population in Cirebon, and so there's that link to the Chinese world and how clouds are also often seen in China and Japan. So a friend of mine, so a batik expert, if I could call him that, had a talk, and I think that was when I decided to look into batik more deeply, was when he talked about batik as a form of remembering someone. He talked about when our relatives pass on in the Malay culture, there's usually a batik that we have prepared to shroud the person. We also talk about when the person passes on and you have to throw out their clothes, and you usually keep the batik because it's very precious. And it was very emotional because I think at that point my mom had just cleared out my dad's closet. I also remembered my late grandmother, and I was not close to her. She passed on when I was 9. But I also remember around that time as well, wearing her kabaya and just immediately feeling this connection to her, immediately feeling her presence. I was like, wow, I need to dive deep into the kabaya, the batik, because that's where I feel that immediate connection that I have been struggling for so long to find. I decided to learn more about not just batik, but just going back to Indonesia. My first trip in 2024, it was really like a homecoming to Indonesia. I went to Java on 3 separate occasions. The first one was an interfaith trip, and that was so revealing to me, and it really reminded me of my family and how blended it was, but also the openness of religion there. The very first person we met on that trip was a queer Muslim author who wrote a story about being queer and Muslim, and I was like, wow, this kind of progressiveness is not something you would see in the Muslim community in Singapore. I was very amazed by that. Even things like in the mosques in Indonesia, the men and the women pray side by side. And I was like, that's so much more progressive than I thought. I think being a Singaporean, you always think that Singapore is amazing, the best, it's very progressive. So going to Indonesia and seeing how culturally rich it is and how it upholds heritage so much, and how it already is progressive and it doesn't need any liberal or new ideas to make it more progressive. I think that was very enriching. I went on 2 other batik specific trips in Java. I spent the first time, I think, 4 or 5 days in Java, and then the next trip, a total of 9 days from Jakarta all the way east to Madura Islands. We had to travel in a minibus because we would be traveling to the kampung, the houses, and we have to squeeze through these alleys to get to their homes. What stood out to me first, right? Before we even got to the batik, was just hospitality and the culture. How every time we stepped into their home, we would sit down first and they would prepare snacks for us and tea. We would sit down and talk a little bit before we looked at the batik. It's a very human connection. It's about relationship building more than just a transaction of a piece of cloth. And then when we looked at the batik and we looked at the process of it, I think one image that stays in my mind was this one batik place where I think 5 women were just seated there and drawing. I did not realize how many people it took to create one batik cloth. It can easily go up to 10 people. A simple design could take 3 months, a complex one 6 months. Just the amount of effort that goes into it was just mind-blowing. It made me think a lot more about the value of money, right? We think we're paying $500 now, but it's $500 over 6 months of work distributed by 10 people. In Islam, we have this concept of rizki, sustenance, right? And that sustenance is from God and it's never truly yours. One story that moved me was this lady. She had a child. We saw a lot of scribbles on her walls and I thought, wow, so endearing. She had a very humble home. When we left, our tour organizer said, oh, Ibu told me that she actually only had $9 in her bank, so she really appreciated us coming and buying from her today. We find it so hard to part with our money and we don't realize how much someone else might need it. I think that was very revealing to me. I think what stands out the most about batik is the meaning making that comes out of it, right? One piece of cloth can tell so many stories. I like that idea of how you look at a person and you know their story, especially because in Singapore it's so easy to simplify someone, right? But when you look at someone's batik, oh, they're from this country and whatnot, it's this unspoken language and understanding. So I get to express my story through batik and I get to learn about others through this medium as well. That has, I think, developed my skill to want to be curious about the nuances and complexities of people and their stories. And really, I think batik is something that allows us to slow down. That is what we need a lot more of in Singapore. Batik is a medium that allows me to slow down, to stay grounded, to get in touch with the present, but more so the past. One of my very first few batik pieces, when I was not even educated about the motifs and all of its meanings, was when I bought a piece that was made by artisans with disabilities. The batik had a tag on it that said, "Please take good care of me." The moment I held it in my hands, I could feel the presence of that person and I just immediately cried. It's that same connection I had with my grandmas, right? Batik as a cloth, as a medium, allows me to remember that there's continuity, there's lineage, there's heritage, and there's always something before me. And there's something that's bigger than me, I think. It doesn't matter if I don't understand myself. Batik is a medium that just asks of you to slow down and understand its meaning. And I cannot call myself a batik expert at all because there are probably millions of motifs that I cannot remember its meanings. But batik does not ask of you to be an expert. It just asks of you to pay attention and be curious and be present, which is something that I feel I needed for myself to understand my identity and my heritage and who I am. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a joy to speak with you.
This conversation has left me raw and vulnerable. Yes, there are moments of light. Her interfaith family, Malays and non-Malays showing up to stand with her cause. 3 scholarships for Gazan students. But the more I sit with everything she shared, the more I realize there are no threads that tie neatly into a beautiful bow of an ending. No resolution to rest my last full stop on. It's a battle, one that Yulianna has chosen to be a warrior for life. A journey where 2 steps forward can still mean 2 steps back. And through it all, Yulianna stands, choosing again and again to be more vulnerable, to stay open, to use her story to heal others, her pain to move the conversation forward. The only positive ending I can find is my own gratitude to her for being open, for choosing vulnerability, for the tears in her eyes, the tears she brought to my own eyes, for being that raw wound on which we can all hinge our hope. Thank you for listening to Yulianna's story, and do join us next time as we share another story and another voice of a strong, inspiring brown woman from Singapore. Thanks for listening.